Councilmember Breckus, can you hear us? I know. Councilmember Breckus, can you hear us? Councilmember Breckus, can you hear us? Okay, great. We've not started the meeting yet. I'll let you know when we call it to order.
Can we do our action items?
Let's try to wrap it up quick. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No.
Yet another event.
Yeah. No. We can make it happen. Clerk. Madam Clerk. Paul. Come on, man. Giddy up. Let's go.
Hi, it's Neoma.
Hi, Councilmember Jordan. We are just about to start the meeting.
Very good.
Okay, welcome everyone. Let's go right to item 1. Mr. Church, could you lead us in the pledge, please? Roll call.
Yes, Breckus,
Here.
Stewart,
Here.
Delgado absent, Mackenzie, Jordan,
Here.
Bob Zine,
Here.
Sheevy.
Here.
Mr. Acting Mayor, you do have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. Public comment. Do we have any public comment this afternoon?
We do. We have public comment from Jeff Church today.
Welcome, sir.
Hi, folks. Good afternoon. Jeff Church, resident of the city of Reno. Just wanted to remind you that Earth Day is Sunday, the 23rd, this coming Sunday at Idlewild Park. The event started at 11 o'clock, so we hope to see all the city council people there, but don't hang around together. We don't want a quorum, so just kind of pretend like you don't know each other. I do want to talk about a little green stuff since it is Earth Day. Number one, I was told by somebody on the council that you're going to have a green parking station, charging station at the your new parking garage. So I hope you follow through on that. That would be great. And of course, that should be free. So please go ahead with that. I also want to comment on something I learned the hard way. I have a plug-in and I've been iced. Icing is when somebody parks with impunity in the green charging stations, as you can see in this picture that I took at a casino recently, when they don't have, in fact, a plug-in vehicle. And why do they do that? Because they can. There's no law against it. There are jerks in the world, and they do that because they don't want to walk from the far parking lot, just like they used to do for the handicap zones before it was illegal. So many states, including the state of Washington, have now made that a citable or towable offense. It's really unfortunate that there are such people in the world that would do that. But I want to remind you, if you have a Nissan Leaf or a Tesla, if you have a Tesla, it's hard to feel sorry for you, but still, if you have a Tesla or a Nissan Leaf or the Mitsubishi plug-in or any of the others, if you don't get your charge, that may mean the difference of not making it home. That may mean the difference that you're on the freeway and suddenly you're out of power in the number 1 lane. So it's not just an inconvenience, it's a dangerous thing. And it means, like I said, it may mean the difference that if you're running around running errands and you're down to 10% power, that you don't get home because some Nimrod, if that's a correct term I can use, has parked in your spot. So we'll see you all at Earth Day on the 23rd. I'll be there. And please support a local city ordinance on this future Earth Day that would prohibit people from parking there so that they can be cited or towed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Church. And Ms. Thomas, if you could make a note to look into that and connect back with Mr. Church, we'd appreciate it. Okay, thank you so much.
And I'll let Mr. Church know, if I may, that I will be kicking off Earth Day. We'll be there.
Okay. Approval of the agenda.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carried. Thank you. And number 5, update discussion and potential direction to staff regarding the 2017 session of the Nevada Legislature. Mr. Gillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Scott Gillis. Good afternoon. A couple quick housekeeping matters. Coming up on another big bill deadline, Tuesday, April 25th is the date by which bills that are not exempt or don't have a waiver must pass out of the first house, the house of its origin. We suspect there'll be some bills falling off at that point. So Monday and Tuesday are going to be very busy days of the legislature. Local government day is Thursday, this upcoming Thursday, the 27th. I just emailed to everyone a draft of the league's schedule and agenda for the day. Mr. Henderson, Wes Henderson, told me he would be sending a final agenda and schedule on Monday. So with that, the first bill I wanted to talk about today is Senate Bill 176. This is the body camera bill. A handful of essentially all council members have reached out to me to talk, to ask about kind of how this bill works, primarily the funding mechanism in it. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to kind of walk through exactly how the bill works mechanically, how it impact the E911 funds going forward and answer any questions. And we have Rishma here from IT, who's would be involved in the implementation process here. She's been involved in the implementation of body cameras at the Albuquerque PD, I believe. So she's our resident expert on the tech side of this. I think we may have Chief Soto or representative coming in at some point to answer questions too, but I'll jump right into the mechanics of the bill. And as an update, the bill, and I'm drawing blank if it's actually moved out of the Senate yet, or I know it's moved out of committee with amendments. Off the top of my head, I don't recall if it's actually moved out of the House. Mr. Hanson, can you look that up for me when you get a second? But I'll jump into the mechanics before that. So the bill takes a permissive section in statute and makes it a mandate that all uniformed peace officers who routinely interact with the public wear a body cam. The bill is applicable to law enforcement agencies, which in the statute with an amendment is defined as the Sheriff's Office, a Metropolitan Police Department, and us, a police department of an incorporated city. Amended into that definition is includes marshals employed by a municipal court. And I looked at this today. It was brought to my attention. The discussion about this addition at the work session for the bill didn't make reference to marshals employed by municipal courts, but and the proposed amendment for the work session didn't include that terminology. But the bill, the amendment as it was drafted in the first reprint, which has moved, includes that reference to municipal court. So I need to follow up the police department and the municipal court to determine if the numbers in our fiscal note include our muni court marshals as well. And maybe, based on the testimony of the bill sponsor, Senator Ford, I don't recall an intention to include municipal court marshals and officers that the body camera mandate would apply to. So we'll need to figure out if that is in fact his intention with the bill and adjust our fiscal note accordingly on that.
And Highway Patrol, are they part of it?
There's some. They're
they already
they're
have 'em.
already right. Yeah. So along with the mandate to utilize the body cameras, the bill would require that law enforcement agencies create and adopt policies governing the use of the body worn cameras. The bill, thanks to the sponsor, the effective date has been pushed back to July 1, 2018. It was originally going to be effective January 1, 2018, but the local governments and the law enforcement agencies asked for more time to prepare for the implementation of it, of this mandate, and this now then aligns with a new budget year, July 1, 2018, fiscal year. I believe that's fiscal year 19. So that's the mandate on the body camera portion. The I think more challenging and concerning portion of the bill is the piece that addresses how body cameras would be funded. So currently, as many of you know, but I'll reiterate it for everyone, state law allows Washoe County to charge up to 25 cents per phone line for the enhancement of the telephone system for reporting an emergency in the county. That has been adopted by the county in the past, the full 25 cents. That was done by ordinance. This is known as the E911 surcharge. Along with the surcharge, there's a requirement in statute that an advisory committee be created, which must create and develop a plan to enhance the phone system for reporting emergencies. Existing law required that a 5-year plan, which was, I think, ostensibly the advisory committee's plan, was adopted by the Board of County Commissioners before they could implement the surcharge that exists today. So that's where we're at today, 25 cents per phone line. That nets approximately $1.6 million per year currently. What the bill does, two main points to that existing revenue generation piece is it would allow not only Washoe County, but now any other county to increase that per line surcharge up to $1. So 75 cents more per line. And the revenue can not only go to the existing uses for the E911 system, but also now the body cameras, and not just the purchase of the equipment, but the bill clearly lays out that this revenue can now be used for the purchase, maintenance, storage of data, upgrade and replacement of the equipment and the software, and personnel for the body cams. So it's kind of a full usage. The revenue, should it be there, can be used for kind of the full everything we would need to fully implement the body cameras with our police department, including IT and software and those types of issues. So we have with the bill the possibility of an expanded pot of money to cover not only the 911 but the body cameras. Again, currently we for just the 911 system we collect $1.6 million per year. If the county decided to increase it to $1, we'd be looking at approximately $6.4 million per year for both these uses. Give you a little background on the fiscal notes that were submitted for just the body camera pieces. In most of the jurisdictions looked at it kind of a 5-year window, looked at a particular vendor, Taser, not that we have to use it going forward, but they kind of have a 5-year model of equipment and licensing. But in short, we'd be looking at about approximately $600,000 per year with some more upfront costs over that 5-year period. Sparks's number was $125,000 per year, and the sheriff's office was $150,000 per year. So those fiscal estimates come in at just under $1 million per year. And I bring that up to point out that if you took that off the full $1 per phone line pot of the 6.4 million, then there'd be roughly 4 or 5 million left for the existing 911 services, what we do now, and potentially upgrades to those systems. So this all could create a very healthy pot of revenue for both these issues. So here's the major caveat. The city of Reno and the city of Sparks and any other law enforcement agency does not have control over what we'd be setting the surcharge at. That under the bill, under the current statute, that's a function for the Board of County Commissioners to determine what that level would be at. What this bill also does is it takes the existing advisory committee, which makes the recommendations to the county as to how the E911 money should be used. It requires that the chief of each law enforcement agency or a designee must sit on that advisory committee. And it's my understanding that the way this would work going forward, should this bill pass as is that group, newly constituted with law enforcement officers on it, would come up with a plan. I would assume it would be a 5-year plan of what costs would be necessary for each agency, and ultimately adopt a plan that would be submitted to the Board of County Commissioners that they would then have to adopt. Again, with the unknown being what level of the surcharge the county would adopt to fund or partially fund these efforts. The only other caveat on the revenue piece is if this fund reaches a balance of unencumbered $5 million, the surcharge has to be reduced accordingly by the county commission. So it cannot be a never-ending pool of money that's not encumbered. But the numbers, the way they work out based on what we've seen from the fiscal notes, the full $1 surcharge would provide an ample pot of money to not only address the body cam mandate, but to make some improvements on the 911 system piece. And that's the summary I have of the bill and its mechanics. Rishma, do you have anything to add at this point? Okay. And then, so I'm happy to answer questions. And just to be clear, our position on the bill to this point has been support with some identified concerns over the funding piece because of our lack of control over what that funding level would be. We've talked to the sponsor about some amendments. He has not been interested for either the North or the South in an amendment which would require the Board of County Commissioners to fund this at a certain level because that attaches to the bill a 2/3 vote requirement. So that's a challenge, that the sponsor of the bill, at least he's unwilling to go there with the legislation.
Okay, council. Mr. McKenzie.
Well, that's the major concern that I've seen with the bill. I mean, I think even last session when they were talking about, excuse me, mandating the cameras, that our police department was not opposed to the idea, and I mean, it's proven out more times than not that these cameras are a benefit to the police officer that's wearing them more often than they're a detriment. So, the concept and this, if we can work out the data storage and the records management for it, the concept is one that's beneficial to our department as a whole. But when it becomes a mandate and we don't have control of how that mandate's going to be funded, it becomes problematic. And to me, this becomes a leverage point with the people that have got to hold the purse strings, because we're mandated to do something that they've got the purse strings to do it. So I don't know how you remove that. I mean, there's actually a capability of them to fund it to a level to fund their own department and not anybody else. So it's you know, the and I understand the bill sponsor's concern about putting a mandate in it that's going to trigger the 2/3, because that's not where you want to be on something that you want to get passed in that legislature. So I'm not sure what the fix is, but I think we need to try to work with him to see if there's a way that we can massage the language in such a way that it can't be that these. There's got to be a way to for that committee to come up with the recommendations for the funding, and then it becomes a funding requirement for the commission to figure out where that funding comes from. If they don't want to do it with this surcharge, then they maybe the answer is to say that it's mandated upon all departments, but the county shall have the requirement to provide the funding to meet that mandate. If they don't want to do the 911 charge, then they can do it out of their general fund. But I'm sure that would make a lot of counties happy. But where they've got the purse strings, somewhere or another, you've got to have the ability to have them take the action they need to provide the funding for it. So, maybe the plan. Maybe the idea is to put the plan together and send it to the county commission, and the county commission has a mandate to fund the plan that's presented by the committee. And then they have the tool of the 911 to do it, or they can fund it out of general fund. They can make the choice. But something of that nature needs to be in the bill to make sure that can't be used as something to adversely affect the agencies. And it's not just us; it's everybody. And I was reading the explanation of the bill that Kate sent out, and it had the part in there about the municipal courts, and I don't think we even thought about those marshals over there and what it'd take to provide cameras for them when we did and to maintain those records.
Yeah, I don't, Scott Gillis for the record, I don't believe the numbers we've put together, which is 243 body cameras for RPD, includes any marshal at the municipal court, because when we did the fiscal note, that piece wasn't in the bill. So the first thing I would want to do on that is follow up with the sponsor and see if it's in fact his intention to include marshals at the municipal court, because that reference wasn't in the language he proposed the work session, but it ended up in the LCB amended version. So I have to go back and do a little bit of research on that. But I can tell you for sure, the municipal court marshals aren't built into our fiscal note.
And then it becomes, are they going to have to establish a system to maintain the data themselves? Or is another possible amendment to the bill is that the county becomes the maintainer of the records and put the district attorney's office in charge of maintaining those records so that that's all under one roof, and that also goes back to the county's funding that, so that all we're looking at is funding the cameras themselves, not the maintenance of the records.
And I think the way this is at least written now, it's broad enough to where the advisory committee, that could be a part of the plan that they come up with, and could recommend as far as how it's stored. Again, with the Board of County Commissioners being, having the ultimate say on that plan, and whether it's adopted in the form the advisory committee pushes it out or not.
But it still comes down to the mandate is on us. It's not on the counties.
Right.
So if they don't agree to that, if it's not in the law and they don't agree to that, it still falls upon us to come up with the funding to maintain those records. And the additional records that the court would have, if we put it on RPD to maintain those records as well, that's going to add a different level of maintenance there, because they're not going to be able to be thrown into the same pool as those records. They're going to have to be maintained separately. And or if the court's got to come up with their own system, then what kind of cost is it going to be to the court to develop a maintenance system for the records? Because I don't believe they probably have one right now. And so just some thoughts of mine. Wave your wand on them and make them.
The only other thing I'll point out, and again, this is just the county's fiscal note estimate that they submitted to LCB. Obviously doesn't tie their hands going forward, but they did note in their fiscal note that they're actually put in a number of 0 as actual fiscal impact, and they noted that increasing the surcharge by the full 75%, or excuse me, 75 cents would increase their revenue by an additional 4.8 million countywide, and that they estimated no fiscal impact with that additional revenue. Doesn't tie their hands. Please go ahead.
Sorry, this is Vice Mayor Jordan. I wonder if, I like to believe that the county wants what all of us want and are being what's being asked of us, and wouldn't do some of the things that Paul is suggesting or that he's trying to protect against. Is there any opportunity to just do a side MOU with the county on this? I don't know if I'm simplifying it too much.
I don't think the legislation would preclude that. It obviously doesn't mandate that type of agreement. I think that type of agreement, whether it be through an MOU or maybe an interlocal, could be dealt with during the advisory committee's process of coming up with their projected plan. And I assume what that advisory committee will do will sit down and take feedback from all the interested entities and come up with a number that funds not only the body cameras going forward, but also, I would assume, improvements to the 911 system, and ultimately come up with what the advisory committee recommends as the number that the surcharge should be increased to. I think through that process, if the county commission was to adopt that or approve that, obviously interlocals or MOUs could be entered into to kind of finalize the details of how this would work. But it's neither required or precluded under the legislation.
Maybe it's an option if we aren't successful in getting something in on the legislation. Maybe we can, in the spirit of cooperation, we can suggest that, or like you said, the advisory group can work that out.
This is Rishma Kimji, Director of IT. Just a quick note on the advisory committee. Currently, there is representation by all agencies on the committee. That includes 2 for the city of Reno. So we have Susie Rogers, who's the director of the 911 system, and we have a lieutenant from RPD that sit on the board. The chairmanship of the board changes yearly and it's voted on. So there is equal representation on the board to ensure that the agencies that are in question have their interests taken to heart. So whenever there's a Reno issue, that is always, subject to everybody else's issues, but there's an equal vote on that. So there is some cooperation already built into the advisory committee now, which helps us when we're looking for funding for 911 activities.
Any other questions by the council? I will continue to, work with the sponsor and the other local governments to see if we can get some changes to make us feel more comfortable. That seems to be the direction I'm getting, so.
Yep. Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. So moving on into the bills, again, with the deadline coming up Tuesday, this is going to be more of an update on where things are at. Not a very heavy hearing schedule of bills this week, nor next week likely. But start with our charter bill. It was heard in Senate Government Affairs on Wednesday. As you may recall, it moved out of the Assembly with a 42-0 vote, which is nice. I've already starting to hear some concerns about the ward-only piece from some of the committee members, mostly related to their background knowledge of the fact that the issue was taken to the ballot in 2012 and how that played out. And I think there's some acknowledgement by the members that the ballot question may not have painted the full picture when it presented to the voters, but we'll still have some work on that bill specifically related to the ward-only piece. And as an update, the City of Tucson case that prompted a lot of the discussion on this change. If you recall, it was the full Ninth Circuit held that the hybrid system is not unconstitutional under the Equal Protection Clause. It was petitioned to the United States Supreme Court, briefed, and about 2 weeks ago, the court denied hearing the petition. So on the Equal Protection Clause piece of the hybrid system, the Ninth Circuit has said it's not unconstitutional. Assembly Bill 80, it's our redevelopment bill. It passed out of Government Affairs last Friday with a vote of 10-4. Almost party lines. There was one Republican who voted for it, Al Kramer, former treasurer of Carson City, very much understands redevelopment districts and what we're trying to accomplish with the bill. One interesting thing that came out of the work session vote was Dina Neal, who's the vice chair of the committee, amended us out of the section in Chapter 279 that requires the 18% set aside for schools once debt is paid off. Again, that doesn't really impact our goals with the bill, but we're just trying to make sure we communicate to the legislators as it makes its way to the floor that there's not a concern there on our behalf, and it doesn't impact what we're trying to accomplish with the bill. Senate Bill 24, which was the League/Reno's vacant property registration bill, it failed to be heard and meet the first committee deadline. Had a number of meetings on this bill with the business sector and the chambers and lenders and realtors and banks, and the group as a whole could never get to a place that they were comfortable with on this bill that allowed us to do anything we couldn't already do by ordinance. And ultimately, it was the decision of the chairman of Senate Government Affairs that the bill wasn't ripe to be heard. So Wes Henderson from the League has committed to trying to work on this issue in the interim with all the stakeholders, and maybe we progress into 2019 with something that will not be as universally hated as this bill was this session. I hope so.
And just real quick on that, I've had a few similar conversations with interests that came together around the bill, I guess you could say, and they also expressed a willingness to try to work through the interim on another approach, because they're sensitive to the issue that we were trying to solve. They just had concerns about the mechanism. So,
Agreed. Moving into a few of the member agency bills that I've talked about so far this session. Assembly Bill 39, this was the regional planning bill submitted by the county. It technically died for not making out of committee, but as you may recall, the county voluntarily requested to the chair that the bill be withdrawn. Assembly Bill 306, which was the bill that would dictate how RSCVA tourism dollars from the room fees would be spent, died for not getting out of the committee. I think there was kind of a grand bargain between some of the properties to not move forward with that bill. Assembly Bill 193, which was the fluoride bill, it died for not getting out of committee. The flood funding bill that we discussed at length last Friday or 2 Fridays ago, it looks like it'll be making its way out of the assembly under the original version of the bill without the Sparks Amendment. The entities are all working together to come up with language that's palatable, and it sounds like we may be getting there. Then ultimately, this will be heard by Senator Ratty as the chair of Senate Revenue and Economic Development on the Senate side, and we'll all need to work with her to make sure there's amendment language going forward that she's comfortable with.
What
as well.
number was that again?
Oh, I'm sorry. Assembly Bill 375. Assembly Bill 203 is the Hillside Cemetery Bill. It moved out of committee last week with the amendments we requested, where we would have to accept title, the transfer of title before the courts could transfer title to a local government. The sponsor was also kind enough to add into as one of the options for if title was transferred to the local government, the option of entering into an agreement with a nonprofit to have them basically take over the operation of the cemetery. But that bill did move at least out of committee. Senate Bill 84 is a very large ethics commission bill that would change the process for the handling of complaints against public officials. I noted at the last meeting that there was almost a complete rewrite amendment to the bill, which moved out of committee. We still have a couple concerns that we'll try to deal with going forward on that bill, but we still haven't seen the first reprint from LCB on the bill. I think that's going to be common for the next few days. Everything's going to be pushed back late because there are a lot of bills that still need to be amended by LCB staff. So we likely won't be seeing the final language on many of these bills until right up against the deadline. Senate Bill 315, which was the recycling and solid waste bill that we've talked about quite a bit. It was referred to Senate Finance out of committee. It did not pass with the amendments. It's worth noting, I think, that the chair of Natural Resources, Ivana Cancella, had some pretty strong opinions for the sponsors of the bill that she didn't agree with the policy changes and suggested that the legislation, should it move going forward, should really focus on some transparency and data collection pieces for the commercial recycling industry. But it remains to be seen if that bill will move out of Senate Finance at all. Senate Bill 463 is the bill that would put some limitations on cities or local governments calculating business license fees based on square footage. There was a pretty heavy-handed requirement that findings for that type of a business license fee would have to demonstrate that the fee is necessary for the provision of services to those properties, kind of almost an impossible standard from local government's point of view. Luckily, Senator Ratty has gotten very involved in the bill and had a large meeting today with the local governments and the business sector who's interested in that legislation, and ultimately she said she's not comfortable with any of the policy that's been addressed so far. And unless everyone in that room could come together with some language that maybe tweaked the business impact statement requirements in a way that was palatable to local government, she would consider that. But otherwise, she's not interested in moving that bill in any way, shape, or form. She's seen it to date. So that was a good meeting. Assembly Bill 379, this is the Parks District Bill. The conceptual amendment, which we were supportive of, albeit it's about 1% of the details of what the bill will eventually do. It did make its way out of committee. I'm working with LCB staff and the sponsor, Amber Joyner, on hopefully getting a reprint of what this would look like prior to Tuesday's deadline. I suspect we will, but this is probably going to be one of those that's dealt with very late on Tuesday. The Senate Bill 259, this was the interlock ignition bill for DUI offenders. It moved out of the Senate today, unanimous. There were some cleanup amendments that appear to tighten up the enforcement of the requirement, but we would still, looks to be a bill we'd still be supportive of, but I'll make sure RPD and the city attorney's office is fine with the changes that are put in place. Next, the marijuana bills, and I realize I keep talking about these bills in kind of general lump sums because that's really where we're at with these bills now. There's still a number of bills that are evolving. The way they were moved out of the Senate Judiciary Committee last week has kind of left everyone with kind of a not entirely clear understanding of what's been moved from one bill to the other and what's left. The amendments, most of them were conceptual or done verbally at the work session meetings, have not been produced into reprints of the bills yet. But my instinct is the local government's gaining traction with making sure that our ability to regulate and license is going to be maintained and retained. We think things are positive at this point, but it's a world we'll continue to track on almost a daily basis. And then we'll be talking about the bills, I think, in more detail on Wednesday at the council meeting under the agenda item. We're discussing these issues that night or that afternoon. Property tax, very little momentum at this point, to be completely honest.
Which
Assembly
number?
Bill 43, which was NACO's bill, which tweaked the secondary calculation, gathered there was not enough will within the committee to want to move that bill. It died for not getting out of committee last week. The primary property tax bill that we're following and working on and supporting is Senate Joint Resolution 14. This is Senator Ratty's bill. It would make a constitutional change that would essentially allow for the reset of the depreciation calculation upon sale. And then once that sale's made in that first fiscal year, the 3 and 8 caps and the regular depreciation calculation would continue from that point on. But it would, it's something that would very much help us, if not completely moving the needle, but it would help us in the revenue. The bill also creates a program for assistance for real property tax bills for seniors. Not a lot of details on that piece, but I think we'll see more of that going forward. And again, because it's a constitutional change, this is a bill that would have to pass out of this session and then identically next session, and it would go to a vote of the people in 2020. So still some challenges to get there with that bill. But with that, that's...
Question on that last thing, or the second to last.
Sure.
Is that okay?
Councilwoman.
Yep. Is the one that's the SB 463, which was the one that amended the equation.
The business license fee?
No,
bill?
I said the wrong number.
The NACO's property
Yeah.
tax bill, AB 43?
Right, AB 43. So is there a chance, I mean, was there any interest in fixing this broken system? I mean, as far as, could this come back up, do you think? Is there enough?
I think it's ultimately possible that the issue could be revived maybe late in the session. There didn't seem to be a ton of interest in...
Do you think that they understand this?
I think so. I think definitely, the committee members in taxation and assembly taxation and Senate revenue had a very detailed explanation, both in person or in hearing from Jeremy Aguero as to what the issue is, and he talked to them, I believe almost all of them individually as well. I can assume they understand the issue. It is obviously a complex topic, but that's...
Well, it's not really that complex. I mean, why I say it's not that complex is the analogy I use with so many is it's just like doing your federal income taxes, you have your taxes, and you come up with, you do the equation for your alternate minimum tax. This is an alternate maximum tax. Okay, this is an equation that says this is the most that you can pay, not the least.
Right.
And so that's all there is. And so that's just that theory, and what the reality of it, the 0.2% that we are getting, to support this tremendous growth. I know we have these two parts, the depreciation and this, but the depreciation is going to take like another 5 years to get to the two sessions and a ballot initiative.
Councilwoman, I share your frustration, but I think my rough analysis on
Yeah.
this, just looking at it, and I don't know this to be true, but my sense would be this is a 2/3 vote. And
Okay,
the
enough
2/3
said.
votes they're going to
Very
store
hard.
them and wait and see what happens. And so
Right.
I think to Mr. Gillis's point that this could surface again later in endgame as they're closing budgets and everything else. But the fact of the matter is, you're not going to see committees push
Right.
forward bills that they know are DOA on the floor.
Yeah. So that's why I said, do you think it could surface later? That's why I proposed that thought. Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you, Councilman. I should have made that clear. Kind of that is really the main issue between the two bills is one, AB 43 requires a 2/3 vote,
Right.
whereas SJR 14, a longer period of time, it
Got
only
it.
requires a majority to get out
Thank
of
you.
the legislature.
But, and Councilman, you're absolutely right, is that with Senator Ratty's efforts on depreciation, it's much needed, but, there's no immediate relief,
Yeah.
frankly. But,
Well, probably
for the
6
long-term
years.
good of the community,
Right.
it's definitely something that
Yes.
we need to continue
And I
to
am
support.
so pleased
Yep.
with what she's done there, and so grateful. And I just hope that it can get through two. This is a very high bar to get through two identically, and then the ballot. It's a big bar. But it is a constitution amendment. I got it. The reset part is the part that's right?
Correct. And I think candidly that, the good and the bad of the projections for next year is that the cap's going to go to 2.6 based on CPI numbers. Had we had another very bad year where it was going to be 0.2 or 0.3 or somewhere along those lines, maybe there might have been more of an appetite to fix it in the short term. But and not to suggest that was the only reason those bills aren't moving, but there wasn't this forecasted kind of no increase type of
Well, maybe I need
budget
to
year.
get that, because when Jeremy Aguero was here and also further conversation, my understanding was we do have a bunch of these years in a row, not just this one unique year this year.
Right. We have a handful of years going forward where part of the calculation, which looks at the 10-year average going backwards, are picking up the bad recession years
Right.
where property values went down. But we just, based on the CPI numbers, which part of the calculation is 2 times the CPI increase,
Right.
we're not falling next year into the world where it's only a 0.2% increase on property tax
Okay.
revenues for existing properties.
Okay.
We get all the way to 2.6.
Okay. Thank you. Well, it is, if it gets to 2.6.
It seems to be the finance people are confident that that's where it's going to land.
Okay, that's good info. Thank you.
And that's all I have, unless there's any other questions.
Okay, do we have any questions from council members at this point?
Not from,
The other cemetery bill.
that's a question.
Oh,
I didn't
yes.
Think about that.
AB 174? 176?
Assemblywoman
Not-
Krasner's bill?
Yeah, it's
AB
not one of the bill numbers
174.
that's,
That this is the bill that would urge the city council to make capital expenditures on the Grand Army Republic cemetery, which is near the Hillside Cemetery. It did move out of committee. I testified in neutral. I committed on the record to setting up a meeting with the Assemblywoman and her interested parties and staff to see what can be done, if there's an avenue through the Neighborhood Advisory Board to do something. But I made very clear that the city would likely be unable to commit any of its parks, funds, and resources to this effort.
So a couple of questions that are really, really prevalent in my mind, because I watched the testimony on that. And there was an insinuation made that there'd been attempts to get the city to do something there in the past. And I'd like to know if there's any record or if they can tell us who they supposedly tried to contact. Because one of the people that testified to that has my cell phone number, and I never got a call about it. The other thing is who actually owns the property? Because we can't just take a piece of property and start doing something to it without having a
The-
clear right to do that from the owner.
The sponsor of the bill and the individual she had with her didn't have an answer to the question of who actually owns the property. And there's obviously the different parcels for the lots that are, you know, I think if Hillside is any example, it's probably owned by somebody who's long past at this point. I'm not aware of any efforts made by the stakeholders to work with our staff previously. I can tell you that the Assemblywoman did not reach out to me on the legislation beforehand. So it was, you know, the bill was a bit of a surprise when it came through.
Well, and for what it's worth, I think we all received the same letter from the bill sponsor on Wednesday of this week, informing us of the bill's passage from committee and asking for our support. And I believe you all received a copy of my response. I went ahead and just responded individually. We all got the letter and, you know, indicated that this was the first time that I had heard of this particular issue. And I'm well aware of the complex. I mean, I've lived in that neighborhood for a number of years, and I know the issues that are up there. I know all the different cemeteries that are assembled in that general area. And so, yes, we have these questions as to, well, who owns a cemetery? And it is somewhat troubling to hear that what was represented in testimony in a legislative hearing, that there were numerous attempts to work with the city. On our scan, we're not finding any record of that whatsoever. And it was certainly the first time I had heard about the issue, and it was the first time that I'd heard about it from the bill sponsor. My sense is that members of the committee were left with the impression, quite understandably, from that testimony, that there was some issue where the city had been contacted and the city was unresponsive. And I believe they're somewhat surprised to learn that, no, this is actually the first time we've heard about this issue. But as was stated by Mr. Gillis, and I made it clear in my letter, that we certainly welcome an opportunity to sit down with the bill sponsor and the concerned constituents to see, you know, what the situation is, what it is, if anything, you know, we could do to assist. But it certainly calls into question the need for a bill when, you know, a phone call would work.
And like I said, I committed to the sponsor and the committee that, you know, we can sit down with staff and talk about their concerns regardless if the bill passes or not. So. And one other update, Senate Bill 176, the body cam bill, I'm informed, did in fact make it out of the Senate 20-1. Too many bills. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you to our legislative team, as always. They're doing great work down in Carson City. I get plenty of good feedback. Do we have any additional or questions or comments on this agenda item at this point? If not, we'll move to item 6, identification of items for future agendas. Does anyone have anything that they'd like to have brought up in this next meeting? Seeing none, we'll go to item 7, public comment. Do we have any additional public comment? Seeing a head shake, we have none. Motion to adjourn.
Second.
We have a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Have a good
Aye.
weekend.
Thanks.